So my name is Carolyn Amparan. I live here in Columbia, Missouri, and one of my roles, I have multiple ones, but one of my roles is to be the local leader for Sierra Club. We call that the chair of the executive committee. It's Osage group. And we do, most of our executive committee does live here in Columbia, but we do cover the whole mid-Missouri area. And then we're one of 4 groups in Missouri, so we have a statewide organization as well. So just wanted to give you that background. I've been in Sierra Club for many, many years, but I got super active about 5 years ago now, and went to my first lobby day, and have been to Washington a few times since then to lobby in Washington. So hopefully I can share that expertise with you. The other thing that I found really helpful when I started this into being an activist is I have a background in sales and marketing. That was my professional career. And I found that what IBM taught me, I worked for IBM, what IBM taught me in sales training is really applicable to when you're going in to talk to an elected official. Same kind of flow of the conversation, same need to develop rapport. So I found that those things are really helpful, and I'll try and share those as we go through this. So I do want it to be interactive because you're going to get the most out of it if you ask your questions or about your experiences. The first part of the presentation will focus on actually having a meeting with an elected official. It could be a state legislator, it could be a city councilman, it could be a county commissioner, could be a public health person. It can be anybody. It could be somebody completely not elected. It could be a school administrator. Anybody that you're trying to meet with to influence them to change something, you can use this information. And so I hope that it will be helpful to you, and please do ask questions. So what we're going to talk about, I've kind of organized this into preparing for your meeting, some good tips for during your meeting, and then after your meeting. And I think these presentations will be made available to anyone who wants to download them. So feel free to take notes, but don't feel like you have to copy every word. After your meeting is also important that many people kind of skip. And then I was asked to also talk about the legislative process in Missouri, about how a bill actually gets passed in our state legislature. And so we'll spend time talking about that and where the optimum points are to be an advocate in that legislative process. So what I'm going to cover today, though, is what I call the optimum approach. So sometimes you may not have the time to do this complete optimum approach every time. And so I don't want you to feel like, if I can't do the research before I go meet with this person, I shouldn't meet with them. Because sometimes time is of the essence, and the most important thing is that you get there and you show up and you deliver your personal message. Because so often, our elected officials are not hearing from anyone. So they're just trying to make the decision that they think is right based upon whatever information they've got. In Jefferson City, at the state legislators, a lot of times the only people they're hearing from are the paid lobbyists. So if we're not there talking to them, then they're not getting the full picture. So the most important thing is to show up and to deliver your message. But I did want to let you know that what we're going to talk about is kind of an optimum way. Okay, so what's good to do to prepare for your meeting? So it's helpful, and I also want to say that even with my background in sales, the first time I went to Jefferson City, I felt intimidated. So that's normal, that's natural. You're going to feel that way because it's a new environment. You don't know these people. They were elected. Maybe they're a bigwig. They're not. But the first time you go, you think they are. And so I just want you to know that it's normal to feel a little intimidated and nervous. That's okay. But the more you prepare, the less you're going to probably be hesitant to go have this conversation. And so you want to learn about your issues. Because most of us, we know how we feel about an issue, but we don't know what the opposition's feelings are about an issue. So you want to make sure that you know both sides of the argument, especially if you're going to go talk to a legislature or an elected official who probably represents the opposition. So I work on a lot of environmental issues and climate change, and so there's, unfortunately in Jefferson City right now, opposition to a lot of my issues. And so I have to be prepared to understand what objections they might raise, as well as to be able to talk about my side of the story. So you want to also, when you talk about an issue, the more you can personalize it, the better, to your personal experience. So explain how it affects your community, explain how it affects you personally, maybe how it affects your family. So that's extremely important, whoever you're talking to. And what are the strengths and weaknesses of your argument? So know that going in. If you actually have a weak point in your argument, it's good for you to know that. Now, it's okay that you're not going to bring that up to the forefront, but you need to know what the weakness of your argument is so you can be prepared in case they bring it up. And then what are the strengths and weaknesses of the opponent's arguments? Because those might get brought into the conversation. And so if you understand those, it's going to help you prepare to present your story. And then it's helpful to anticipate questions and, have an answer ready. And it's also, if you're going to take any leave behind materials, then it's good to familiarize yourself with those. Actually read them. And because a lot of times when we go, like for a Sierra Club lobby day, I heard in the earlier session they were talking about lobby days, but we do those for Sierra Club too. We get some flyers on each of the key bills we're going to be talking about. And it's good just to take, 5 minutes to read them and make sure you understand all the points on them in case they ask you a question about that. So I mentioned that a personal story is very effective. And so, what do we mean by a personal story and how do you prepare it? Well, for one thing, you got to keep it short. You can't, get up there and, start rehashing, like, for example, I have experience with Lyme disease, unfortunately. I could talk for 2 hours probably about my experiences with Lyme disease. An elected official doesn't want to hear that. They want to know the net about my personal experience and how it relates to this issue. So it's good to practice it because sometimes when we have a personal story, it's real easy to get caught up in the emotion of it and start going on, and they're just going to get turned off by that. A lot of times when we meet with elected officials, we have 15 minutes or at best 30 minutes. And there might be multiple issues you want to cover, so you got to keep that in mind in terms of your timing. A personal story really does need to be personal. It needs to be about yourself. It may be your best friend, maybe your children or your grandchildren or your spouse, somebody that you're very acquainted with so that you can, authentically share their experience. Not just, well, there was this lady in my neighborhood and I heard she had this and such another problem. No, it needs to be more personal than that. And of course, you want to tell a story that supports your position on an issue. So for example, when I went to Washington to lobby about clean air, I could talk about the fact that when I lived in St. Louis, I developed asthma. I moved away from St. Louis, I no longer have asthma. It was the quality of the air in St. Louis, in my opinion, that was affecting me to have asthma. Because I didn't have it before I went, I didn't have it after I moved away. So when I talk about clean air, it was a story that very much affected that issue. And then try and keep it simple. I put some environmental examples up here. I've also just talked about the asthma. Like if we're trying to protect a river, does a person have experience with that river? Like they fish on it, they canoe on it. If we're concerned about something related to flooding, have you had personal experience with flooding? So just really look at your issue and say, how does this affect me, and do I have any kind of personal story to tell? So it's important to craft your message before you go into a meeting. So even if you don't have a personal story, and you might not, I don't have a personal story about everything that I've lobbied on, you still have a personal message. I, as a constituent or as a member of this community, I care about this issue, and I have reasons I care about it. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that your story or your message is personal. And so before you go into the meeting, so that you can articulate it, take some time to think about, well, why is this issue important to me? So like for me, I talk a lot about climate change. I need to understand, well, why is climate change important to me? Is it important to me because I'm worried about my grandchildren? Is it important to me because I care about the birds that it's going to kill? Or do I care about the polar bears? I mean, why is it important to me? And so you need to be able to articulate that. And it really helps, especially if you're going to be nervous the first time you go in, to sit down with a friend or family member and just try and tell them, well, I'm going to go to this meeting tomorrow, and I want to just, practice sharing why this issue is important to me. And then, as I said, it's so important to be able to be concise, because we've all had to deal with somebody who goes on and on and on, and you're just like, get to the point. Well, most of the legislators are busy people or elected officials, and so, it's important to get to your point. Okay, so how do you get to know your targets? And your target in this case is the person that you're going to go meet with and lobby for some type of change. As I said, it could be a school official, it could be an administrator, it could be an elected official like a city councilman, or it could be a state legislature. And I originally put this presentation together focusing on the state legislature, but I've tried to broaden it a bit. So you might want to research your people a little bit. And today we, of course, most of us have access to the internet and Google, and so you can Google people and find out quite a bit about them that way, because you can, if they ran for office, there's probably stories about the positions that they have. Sometimes you can look up their votes. There's just different things that you can do to research them. And so with state legislators, one of the things that's important to know is what committees they're on. And so that's real easy to find out, because they're most interested in the bills that come before the committee that they're on. And so a lot of times, things that go to committee never make it to the floor, and so they don't really worry about them until it looks like they're going to start coming to the floor. So like, for example, if you're going to call on Congresswoman Vicki Hartzler, she sits on the Armed Services Committee in the House. So she's really interested in military issues, but she's not on the Energy Committee. So she only cares about energy bills if they're actually going to make it to the floor. And so she'll say things like, well, I'll take it under advisement, I'll remember your opinion if this happens to make it to the floor. So that's one thing that helps you know, and also it helps you know who to target. So if you got a bill coming up before a committee, or if it's a certain city council member's district, then you know that they're going to be more interested. And you don't just have to call on your personal legislator. You can call on everybody on the committee if that's what you want to do and you have time to do it. So it's important to pay attention to the role that they have in and beyond just being the elected official. Do they sit on a committee? Do they lead a certain area? What part of the city, community, county do they represent? That type of thing. Okay, so when you go to these meetings, when we have Sierra Club Lobby Day, we have a team of people who are lobbying together. So, which is very nice, because you don't have to feel like you're an expert on every topic that might be covered in that meeting. You don't have to be on the hot seat for the whole 15 or 20 minutes of the conversation. You could share that responsibility with others. And so that's another confidence builder that I would suggest to you, that if you want to go meet with somebody, find somebody that's like-minded like you and take them with you, because that way you can play off of each other and have a good conversation. And I think that really does help people build their confidence, particularly if it's a first time of trying to go in and have a advocacy meeting. Technically, it's not called lobbying unless you're paid for it. If you're a citizen volunteer like I am, it's called advocacy. So, but we all say lobbying anyway. Okay, so what happens? So you want to get on the same page with your team. So when we go to these Sierra Club Lobby Days, we have like 10 minutes to get on the same page with the people we've been assigned to be with. So real quickly, we try and make some plans. We say, okay, who's a constituent? So we're going to go call on Congressman or State Representative Kip Kendrick. Who lives in Kip Kendrick's district? Because first and foremost, you do. So first and foremost, they're going to care even more about a constituent than they're going to care about the rest of the people in the meeting. So if the constituent feels comfortable talking about an issue, then you want to have the constituent say that, and when you go in, you need to say, I live in your district. I am your constituent. So you want to make sure that they know that. Then, a lot of times it's nice to have one person who kind of controls the flow of the meeting. So, get the introductions done, make sure that you're staying on time. And I've done multiple lobby meetings, like in Washington, we also generally have a team that has gone into lobby. And we've had we actually came up with, after one of our meetings, we came up with sort of a secret signal, because if we were causing the person that we were meeting with to get agitated, or someone was talking too long, then we had a secret signal where I would start tapping my pen like I was nervous or something, and that was an indication that they needed to drop it and move on, either because they were agitating the person or because they were just talking too much. So you want to, work out some things like that in advance, because especially if you're talking about an issue that might get contentious, you want to be able to deal with that. Before you go into a meeting, you also want to know who has the personal story. So if two of you have personal stories and two of you don't, then you want to let the people who have the personal story lead. Somebody should be responsible for thanking the person you're meeting with. You either thank them for their time in meeting with you. If you can, you want to add something else. Thank you for voting yes on such and such bill. Thank you for implementing this change in your school district. Whatever you can find to thank them for. And it can be hard sometimes. Try and find something to thank them for. And it might not even be related to your issue at all. Like, for example, when I went to call on Vicki Hartzler, I didn't actually talk to her, but I talked to her staff. I thanked her for something she had done. Oh, she voted for money for Lyme disease research. So we weren't calling on her that day about Lyme disease research, but it was personally important to me that she had done that, so I thanked her for it. So you want to have somebody responsible for that. You want to know who's comfortable talking about each issue, because, for example, a lot of times when we go to a lobby meeting, there might be 3 or 4 bills that we want to talk about, and so different people are going to be more comfortable talking about different bills. So you want to know who's going to take the lead. You want to know what your ask is. So, and you should always have an ask. And what I mean by an ask is, do you want them to vote yes on something or no on something? Do you want to ask them to, if they're a committee chair, maybe you want to make sure that the bill gets a hearing. If you're asking them to vote a certain way on a county or a city issue, know what you want from them and be bold about making the ask. I mean, sometimes you can tell through the course of the conversation that there's actually no way that they're going to vote the way you want. And so maybe you modify your ask to ask them to consider some information or something like that. But know what your ask is and be bold about it. And know who's going to ask the question. So somebody should be in the hot seat out of your team that they're going to ask the question. It also helps sometimes to have a note taker, so that if they bring up, and this can be somebody who's uncomfortable speaking. That's often a good role for somebody that wants to go there and they want to be present, but they don't necessarily want to speak. Because when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to catch everything that the other person may be saying and the points they might be making, and then remember them when you get out of the room. So it's really good to have a note taker. And somebody needs to keep an eye on the time, like I should be doing now. And then also you want to have a closing thank you. And so it's just good to know who those roles are. And later today, there's another session where George Lauer from Citizens Climate Lobby is going to talk. And he'll tell you some of these same things potentially, because Citizens Climate Lobby uses the same team format and the same kind of approach. So another thing that's really helpful is to have visuals. So if you're trying to make a point, if you can show them a bar chart or a graph or anything that is going to convey that, as they always say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in this case it really is. It can be very influential to hold up a graph or a diagram or a picture or something. So think about visuals that you can take to your meeting. Also, you could have leave-behinds that are things like a letter to the editor that maybe appeared in a paper in their district, editorials, opinion editorials that maybe appeared in their district. So you can bring all those kind of things to support your position, because they actually do pay attention to like what newspapers and things in their districts are saying. Dress the part. Like when I go to Jefferson City, I spent a lot of years in corporate America, so, I look like a corporate person when I go to Jefferson City. I don't come in looking like a Sierra Club person in sandals, Birkenstocks, and, a hippie outfit. And that's actually what they expect for a Sierra Club person. Most of us don't look like that, but that's their expectation. So I would say, don't buy new clothes, but, recognize that you're in a professional environment and dress the part, either business casual or business attire. So during the meeting, and this is particularly true in Jefferson City, be prepared to wait. You get there on time, but they'll probably be late. I said open with a thank you, be courteous, and be honest. Oh, another thing is a lot of times a question may come up that you don't know the answer to. And so just acknowledge that. That was something that was very true when I was in sales. Customers were always asking technical questions that I couldn't answer. And so, just say, well, I don't know the answer to that, but I will get back to you. We'll look that information up and we'll follow up with you. Also during the meeting, do not argue, whatever you do. Do not argue. Your goal there is to influence this person. Arguing with them is not going to influence them. It is going to close their mind. They're going to just get mad at you. They're going to think bad things about whatever organization you're with. So do not argue. And it's important to have a 50-50 conversation. So you want to understand and build common ground. You want to understand what their issues are. And if you disagree, you don't want to permanently close the door with this individual. So that's why you want to, just say, well, obviously we're not going to agree on this particular issue, but, we appreciate your time and, want to keep the doors open. So, and then another thing that can be helpful is when you do have another person there with you, a teammate, if you're getting agitated, feel free to, pass the ball to somebody else. Because it's most important that you stay calm so you can make your points and let the other person take over if you're getting agitated. You don't want to get up and run out of the meeting, if possible, but just let somebody else take over. So, as I said, stay on message, avoid tangents, know your ask, get an answer. The conversation should be 50-50. So the people who are there to influence the elected officials should not talk more than 50% of the time, if possible. You want to ask the legislator their position on things. If they tell you that they can't support your position, ask them why. And do this in a calm way. Don't get, really indignant about, well, why not? Say, well, I'd like to understand your position on that. And then they will share information with you that will be extremely helpful in convincing them about why your position is the right one and theirs is the wrong one. So, but if you don't ask the question, you're never going to know why they feel that way. Sometimes it may be they have misinformation. Sometimes there's new information that they haven't been updated on. I mean, there can be all kinds of things that you have an opportunity then to overcome that objection. If there's any follow-up actions, it's good to try and recap those at the end of the meeting and say, you asked about this and we're going to get back to you on that. And if you want a picture for social media, they're usually agreeable to that, and go ahead and take your photos usually at the end of the meeting. So after the meeting, I recommend that you have a little debrief with your team, figure out what you thought you did well, what you thought didn't go so well, because this will just help you be more effective the next time you go. Again, this is best practices, doesn't always happen. Send a thank you note. I know Citizens Climate Lobby actually has you write thank you notes right when the meeting's done, and then you can drop it off with their staff people. This is in DC. But you can follow up with an email. And the other thing about it is it just gives you another opportunity to reiterate your position. Or if you're like me and you walk out and you think, oh, I wish I'd said X, then the follow-up thank you email is another opportunity to put in that brilliant thought that you had later but not in the meeting. So, and then it turns out that these legislatures actually are quite happy for you to engage with them on a regular basis. So if you have an issue that you care about, like I know Rita is getting involved in fighting CAFOs, you can actually send them ongoing information about that subject to their email, whether it's, the latest, story about pollution being caused by a CAFO, or, whatever the story is. Of course, it supports your side of the picture. You can send that in, and then that helps keep them informed when you're not there. Yes?
Have you found, are they more apt to pay attention to information that you send by email, or an actual handwritten letter, an envelope, and physical materials, or something else?
Right. Well, we asked them, we particularly asked when I was in Washington the last time, we actually were meeting with some people on the staffs who were communications people for the staff, and they said it doesn't matter to them that whether it comes by email or physical paper letter. Now, I know Indivisible feels strongly that, phone calls are best, or paper letters are best, but they say that they count, some of the people said they count them all the same. If they get 5 communications on climate change, it doesn't matter if 1 was by email, 3 were by phone, and another one was by paper letter. They say they count them all the same. That's 5 communications about acting on climate change. And most of the time, like with the Washington people, if you're sending an email to try and keep up with somebody, you're going to be doing that with the staff person, not with the actual congresswoman or senator. So, but now in Jefferson City, they don't have staffs. Well, some of the senators might have 1 person, but the House members don't have any staff usually, other than maybe a secretary type person. So you just have to communicate directly with them. But I know with the Citizens Climate Lobby, which I'm also involved with heavily, if you haven't figured that out, they have found it to be pretty effective to have ongoing communications with a designated staff member. They do all their lobbying in Washington, and so they usually have a designated staff member that they keep up with about things. You try and share with things that are happening back in the district. Like I said, those editorials that are getting printed and things like that. So, any other questions at this point?
I have a question about during the meeting.
During the meeting, yes.
You mentioned that it's not good idea to start from them, but like if I say like this is really important matter to me, issue to me, that if you don't do this, I will not vote for you, or I will help my friend not vote for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that counterproductive? Is better not to say that? Or?
I would say, so the question is, I just repeat for the recording, the question is when you're in a meeting, if you find that they're taking a position opposite of you, and it's an elected person, do you tell them you won't vote for them and that you'll try and get all your friends not to vote for them? I would say if it's your first meeting with them, try not to do that, because you're not going to have an opportunity to develop any kind of an ongoing relationship. And if you think you're going to have future meetings, if you think there's any room for negotiating, but I think if you're not going to have future meetings, or if you're not worried more about a long-term relationship, then it's okay to say, well, if you take this position, then this is just something that is so important to me. I will not be able to vote for you in the future. And the important thing about that is to do it in a nice way. Don't just scream, I'll never vote for you again, and storm out of the room. Just say, well, we have such a strong difference on this again that I find this as an issue that I can't vote for you. So
I think it's a good idea to say in the future or again, implying perhaps that you voted for them.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I did say again, didn't I?
So that would count for a lot more.
Right.
than just-
Right, like, for example, now, I, really don't want to vote for anybody who doesn't support action on climate change. That's become a priority voting issue for me. And, other people have other single issues that they vote on. Well, for me, that's my priority single issue, so. And so I wouldn't hesitate to tell someone that well, I can't vote for you if you're not gonna, take,
I can vote for you.
again, yes.
Yeah, make sure that they didn't just get there though.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the general overview about how to have a meeting. So are there any other questions you want to ask about that before we go on to understanding a little bit more about how a bill gets passed in Missouri and where the good advocacy points are in this process?
How do you ask them to have a meeting?
Okay. So the question is, for the recording, how do you ask the person you want to meet with to have a meeting with you? And I think that kind of depends on who your target is, who your influencer is you're trying to meet with. Some of the people, like a city councilman, you can just call them and leave a message or send them an email, and generally they'll agree to meet with you. Like recently, for some work that Kim and I are doing on the climate task force, I wanted to meet with the fire chief. So it was more of an information gathering meeting than an influencing meeting, but I just, contacted him and said, well, I used the info contact form on their website and said, I want to meet with the fire chief or someone else appropriate about this topic. And they immediately got back to me and scheduled the meeting. So I think you just have to go through, either call their office, email, tell them what you want to meet about, who you are. If you're representing an organization, it's good to mention that because some organizations are more powerful than others. Like with Sierra Club, sometimes, if we meet with certain legislators who are pretty anti-environment, they'll say, well, I don't know why you want to meet with me, but, they recognize that Sierra Club is a strong organization, so they would generally take the meeting. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, for example, even if you try to meet with him, he won't
No.
say no. So I wonder if there is a way to persuade them or what do you do when they say no?
Well, you meet with, in the case of a lot of the federal people, you have to meet with their staff. And that's okay, because I know it would be great to get to talk to the congressperson or the senator themselves. But, they have a lot of meetings they have to go to just to do their job, so they don't have a lot of time. But, if you meet with their staff is always advising them on positions. And their staff, like especially with the senators, they have specialists in different areas. So they might have, somebody who specializes in military issues or environmental issues or education issues. And so you want to ask to speak to the staff person then who specializes in your area. Now, like if you go to Congresswoman Hartzler's office here in town, there's only a couple staff people there, so they meet with you pretty much on every issue that you want to talk about. But it is their job to make sure those comments get back to the congressperson. So it's okay to meet with staff. And I have not successfully gotten a meeting with Roy Blunt yet, so I really can't tell you other than that if you can get, and I think I skipped over a point in my presentation about when you're talking with the people, the staff people, or if you're fortunate enough to talk to the elected person, sometimes certain voices are more influential with them than others' voices. So, for example, Vicki Hartzler really cares about the rural voices and the farming community voices. So if you actually have, if you can set up a partnership with one of those groups, or they, maybe support your issue, if you can bring one of those in. So for like, if I could actually find an issue that I agreed on with the Missouri Farm Bureau, if I took the Missouri Farm Bureau with me to set up an appointment with Vicki Hartzler, the odds that we would actually get to talk with Vicki Hartzler go up exponentially, because she cares about the Missouri Farm Bureau more than she cares about Sierra Club. So if you can figure out, and sometimes you just have to ask, because, so for example, when we're talking about like with talking with people about, well, what's going to take to change your position on this? You know, like they might not think climate change is an important issue because they're not hearing enough from their constituents about it. And we'll say, well, who do you need to hear from in order to help influence your position? And so they might say, because we've actually had this conversation, they might say the Missouri Farm Bureau, or they might say the rural electric co-ops. And they'll actually tell you, these are the people who are my influencers. And so they'll shed light on who you need to be getting on your side to make your position more powerful. And so with Citizens Climate Lobby, for example, you know, we've been working, and with Sierra Club both, we've been working on the rural electric co-ops to try and get them into a better position related to clean energy. So I would say if you can find somebody that's, you know, unfortunately, like I'd say more powerful than me, you know, more influential than yourself, because they've told you no, then it just means you don't have enough power or influence. And so you want to try and find somebody else who does. But I would say don't hesitate to meet with staff. So, and I have not ever been turned down for a meeting with staff on any of the senators or Congress people. So, yes.
I just wanted to share, I was very lucky, and I did get a meeting with Roy Blunt.
Well, you're good.
But because, and I was not happy about how it happened, but then I was able to turn around. He has coffee with constituents. And so I went to coffee with constituents, and as he went by me in the room and thought he would just touch everyone's hand, I didn't let go. And I got several minutes to talk to him about the issues I cared about. And then when they asked if we wanted to have a picture taken, which I was not happy about when I was signed up for it, I used that as my next opportunity to reiterate those points. Now, I may never see Roy Blunt again, and I see Claire McCaskill all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that strategy would work for Vicky Hartzler. I have tried, and you just can never find Vicky Hartzler.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an idea that, you know, and again, I went in with a bad attitude and then realized, oh my gosh, here's my opportunity.
Right.
And I was in Washington, D.C., and I went to coffee with constituents, and I just...
Right, and that is something I know Senator McCaskill does that every week. So does Senator.
So does he.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
That week, the Republicans were much more popular than the Democrats that I was in Washington, and so I got Claire all to myself.
Oh, how nice.
For 10 or 15 minutes, which is lovely. But, you know, we can always find her because she makes an effort to be out and about.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it may or may not work. I was just lucky that day.
Right, and that's important to know what day if you're going to Washington, it's important to know what day they do that because, like, I had already booked my plane ticket, so I had to miss, you know, the thing was the next day. So if you want to possibly leverage that, make sure you check what the schedule is so that you can make sure you include that in your trip. So if your person, your target does that. Good point. Thanks for sharing
I
it.
did have my follow-up meeting with staff that lasted, I think, each of them in excess of an hour.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, staff will give you time, and you need to also, if you want like an hour, you should tell them that up front when you make your appointment. And then the other bad thing that can happen is that sometimes you end up meeting in the hall. So don't be put off by that, and this can happen in Jefferson City or Washington. Don't be put off by that. It's very uncomfortable, and it's often noisy, so it's very hard to have your meeting. But if that's the best you're going to get that day, go for it. You know, try and make your points, and don't just get disgruntled because why are we meeting in the hall? So even some of the congressmen in Washington, their offices are so small that they can't like conduct 2 meetings at once, and so if you're meeting with a staff person, you end up doing it in the hall. Very annoying. But all right, any other questions on that? All right, and we can come back to it if you think of something else. Okay, so the legislature. So just a few high points in case people don't remember back from when they might have learned this in junior high. The legislature meets from January through mid-May, but they can start filing they can pre-file bills as early as December. So I know the people in our team for Sierra Club who try and track the bills, they start looking at the pre-files as they're coming in. Because over the course of a session, there can be more than 1,000 bills. And so it's really hard to keep up with them And so if you start looking at them as they're pre-filed, you can start building your list of these are the bad ones, and these are the good ones, and these are the ones I want to watch. Bills can be introduced in either the House or the Senate. Appropriation bills that spend the money generally originate in the House. And after the 60th day of the legislative session, no more bills can be introduced. So that's always kind of rush, because at least it's like, okay, we only have to deal with what we already know about. So once a bill, yes, question?
On the previous screen, it said appropriate bills. Should that be appropriation?
Oh, did I type it wrong? Yes, it's appropriation.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll fix that. A little typo. My computer broke, so I ended up not finishing these slides till late last night. So, okay, so once a bill is submitted, it gets a number, and then it goes through what's called the first read, where they just read it and the bill number and the title. And then it gets put on the calendar for a second read. And so then it gets a second read. So what that basically is, they stand in the chamber, they say bill number this, about this, and they read the bill. And then after the second read, it gets assigned to a committee. And so this is the point where things start to get important, is that the bill has now gone to a committee. And so you really want to watch it in the committee, because the committee is where things either can gain traction or they can go to die. And so depending on what you want to happen with the bill, the committee becomes very important. So if the committee chooses to consider a bill, then the bill will have a public hearing. Now, the tricky thing about public hearings is they're sometimes scheduled on very short notice. So like on Monday, you might find out that on Wednesday at 8 a.m., there's a public hearing on your bill down in Jefferson City. So that means you have to scurry around and try and get somebody to Jefferson City who can testify. But if you're trying to stop a bill, then the best place to stop it is in committee, because you have a smaller group of people to deal with. If you want to advance a bill, then obviously you need the committee to pass that bill out of committee with a favorable recommendation. So the committee is extremely important.
Does a bill get public hearing? Every bill get public hearing?
Every bill does not get a public hearing. So a lot of bills will just go to the committee and never be heard from again, and rightfully so. Because there's a lot of strange bills that get pre-filed. So every bill will not get a public hearing. I know there was a bill that it had been filed 3 years in a row, and it never got a hearing. And so our goal for that year was just to get that bill a hearing. And that often happens to bills from the minority party. So now, for example, if a Democrat in the state legislature submits a bill, it might never get a hearing because the Republicans are in charge and decide, what's going to get hearings and such. Yes?
Do all bills that are being considered by the committee get a hearing?
No.
Is any bill that
No, the committee cannot take,
That might pass, get a hearing?
no, the committee can't take action without having a public hearing.
Okay, so every bill that might actually.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Must have a public hearing.
Yeah,
Okay,
that if they're going to pass a bill, they have to have a hearing on it. So
so if there's no hearing, there's no worry about it.
that's my understanding, yes. So, and I'm certainly not an expert on this, and they can change the rules on us too.
Yes, I know.
So they can vote, each chamber makes its own rules, and they can vote to change the rules. So, but I think, my understanding is they do get hearings. Now, the other thing that I have observed, 2 years ago, they started sending bills to 2 committees. So the first committee would do a hearing, and then they would, pass it. And then it would go to another committee that they have these big super committees or oversight committees. And I did not ever see the second committee hold hearings. So I don't know why they have the second committee looking at the bills, but they're,
To rewrite the bill.
I just to get more eyes on it maybe. So, all right, we need to move on. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little about the public hearing though, because this can be another important opportunity to advocate for your position. And so, I've done this a few times. The first time I went, it was a little scary, but because there's no rules about what you're supposed to do on the web. So they want you to keep, most of the committee chairs want you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. They prefer that you not read your comments, that you just come in and talk to them, but you can read your comments if you feel uncomfortable in doing it any other way. They can ask you questions. So once you're done with your comments, they will potentially ask you questions. So you want to be prepared to answer those if you can, because again, it's an excellent opportunity to educate them. Both people who are for the bill and against the bill are supposed to be allowed to speak. And the committee chair decides who's going to go first, usually based on their own personal bias. And then if there's like a whole bunch of people that want to testify, you might run out of time to hear everybody. So if you're sitting there being kind of nervous and thinking, I don't want to, I'll just wait till the last person or something. If there's a lot of people in the room, get up there and say what you want to say. When it's your turn, you have to make sure that you're waiting until they say opposition or for or against. One time I stood up at the wrong time, and that was embarrassing. But okay, and then take a printed copy of your remarks, because you fill out a testimonial form with your name and address, and if you represent an organization, and you can like just paperclip your comments to the form to make sure that if they were snoozing during your presentation, then they have an opportunity to read it later. So then after the public hearing, at some point the committee goes into executive session, not necessarily that day, and maybe a future day. But they go into executive session. That's still public. It just means they're going to vote and there's no testimony taken. And so then the committee can vote, and they have several different outcomes. They can have do pass, which they refer it back to the chamber that it came from with do pass, meaning, okay, we're fine with this bill, you should pass it. They can do pass it with committee amendments. They can substitute a bill. So they can say, well, we like the concept, but here's the bill we prefer better. Or they can recommend that it do not pass. If they recommend that it do not pass, the only way it can get to the floor then to be voted on by the whole chamber is if a majority of members would vote to take it up. So, and that doesn't happen very often. So it's kind of a death knell. Generally, if something comes out of committee, do not pass, which could be a good thing depending on your side. And they can also pass it out without a recommendation. Yes?
Is that like a discharge petition?
Yes, I think, I don't know the exact name of it, but it's some kind of petition.
Yeah, it's a discharge petition on the federal level.
So what if the bill gets stuck in committee, meaning that they're just sitting on it and they're not having a hearing or anything, and it's a really important issue? Well, and I was not able to find what the rule in the Senate is, but the rule in the House is that 1/3 of the members can vote to take that bill back out of committee. Because I think we witnessed that a lot at the federal level, where something important is in a committee and one committee chair is sitting on it and really impeding the whole process. One thing that I found is that if a legislator is on a committee early in the session, they're only paying attention to bills that are going to come before their committee. So like sometimes we have in-district meetings with legislators where we want to talk about a whole bunch of issues. They might be completely unaware of that bill early in the session if they're not on the committee that is going to hear it. So it doesn't mean that they don't care about it. It just means that they got other things on their plate, and that's what you're there to educate them about. So after the bill gets out of the committee, then it goes through what they call the perfection process. This is assuming it was passed in some form. It goes through the perfection process where it's placed on the calendar and scheduled for debate on the chamber floor, either the House or the Senate, depending on where it originated. Amendments will be voted on that came out of committee. And then after those amendments are voted on, amendments can be made from the House floor or from the Senate floor. After all amendments are voted on, if the bill passes, then it's considered perfected and ready to print. And at that point, you only have to have a majority of the members present, as opposed to a total majority. A majority of the members present to perfect a bill. So after perfection, and this is how you can tell if your bill is moving, because you can see the status online, and you can see if it's gone to perfection, if it's scheduled for third read. This means it's moving. So third read and final vote, it gets put on the calendar. At this point, they can only make technical corrections, like maybe they misspelled appropriations. Debate is still allowed, And then after the debate ends, then the roll call vote gets taken. And so this is where they really have to go on the record as before or against the bill. It takes a constitutional majority at this point to pass. And then if it passes, it moves on to the other chamber, and the whole process starts all over again. So just because something passes the House, it doesn't mean that it's going to pass the whole legislature. It still has to go through the same process in the Senate or vice versa. So, and I'm out of time, so I just want to close with, a lot of bills never move. So make sure that you don't get all riled up just because somebody filed a bill. And you don't want to marshal all your resources to fight a bill that's just been filed. You want to save your resources for when a bill actually starts moving. It gets a hearing, it gets, passed by one chamber. All of those things are signs that now is the time to marshal your resources, not just because some stupid bill gets filed by some crazy legislator. Okay, and I can stay for other questions, but I do want to make sure that we're sensitive to that somebody else, I guess, is it lunchtime? It's lunchtime. Okay, so we can stay for a few more minutes if you want. Does anybody else have any other questions?
So is this same process in the House and Senate?
Yes, yes. And there are a few more slides when you get my presentation. And the governor's role, we'll just real quick on the governor's role. The governor has, if something passes both chambers, it goes to the governor, and he has 15 days if they're in session to sign, or 45 days if they're out of session. And so, if all else has failed and a bill you don't like has passed, then you got to make sure that you can still advocate to the governor to either pass it or veto it. And remember that if he vetoes something, or she someday, if she vetoes something, then there will be a veto session where the legislature can try and override that veto. It takes 2/3 majority. So just to close, good opportunities to advocate are at public hearings, before the committee votes, so between the hearing and the vote, sometimes there's an opportunity for follow-up in there. Go talk to every committee member, whatever you want to do. Before any chamber debate and vote, and before the governor acts, and before a veto override. Because sometimes, even though somebody voted for a bill in session, once the governor vetoes it, you can change their mind and get them to change their vote in the veto session. So, all right, well, thank you very much for your attention.